Brian's clearly shown us this morning what it looks like when the light of the gospel shines into our hearts, exposing who we are, our genuine guilt before God, and our absolute need for Jesus. And my mind was immediately drawn to one of the central characters in The Lord of the Rings. My wife and I are reading through that trilogy together. And even though the author of The Lord of the Rings says quite explicitly in the beginning that the story is not an allegory, yet the images are filled, they're literally dripping with truth because he himself was a committed follower of Jesus. And so many of you who have read the books or have seen the movies know that there's a character in the story named Smeagol, who later is known by the name of Gollum. He goes through a similar conversion-type experience that Paul does, in a sense, and even gets a new name for it, just as Paul did. You see, one day he stumbles upon this thing called the ring, which had tremendous power to more or less grant the wearer all kinds of wishes to fulfill whatever their hearts really desired. The trouble was that this power was always used for evil instead of for good, and that the desires of their hearts became ultimate, and it began to corrupt them. And so his conversion was actually a conversion into darkness. And this horrific transformation is pictured for us in the movies as his body begins to get twisted and contorted. His hair falls out, and so do his teeth. And he begins to look less and less and less like the creature that he once was as he becomes something that is deformed and hideous. And his own reflection even startles him and frightens him, and so he cannot bear to look on it. And he eventually descends into the darkness to be as far away from the light as possible so that he does not have to think about what he has become. But if you stop and think about it for a moment, you realize just moving to the darkness didn't change what he was. That going to the darkness so he didn't have to think about it anymore actually was a further cause in the story of his continued progression in this kind of eternal death, where though he continued to live, he was less and less like he was supposed to be. This kind of death that went on forever. Of course, you know the story. He's parted from this ring for a season. And it begins to look like maybe he really will begin to undergo a transformation and become more like he was made to be in the beginning, that he might actually be restored to what he formerly was. There are glimpses and glimmer of hope throughout, and yet unfortunately that's not how it ended for him. That he actually ends at the end of the story clutching to what he cared for more than even life itself, as his body submerged between the lava. In the lava. And the image there that we see held out before us this morning is so rich and dripping with truth for what it is that we've just talked about. That many of us, when the light of the gospel shines in our lives, are tempted like Gollum to run to the darkness, thinking that if we can just get away from this person who's telling me that I'm sinful and guilty and that my life actually is offensive as it is before God. If I can just shut that person up and get away from these people and go off and be somewhere by myself, then I know I'll be okay. But you won't be okay. Like Gollum, you'll continue to transform into progression, a kind of progression that brings destruction in your life, and eventually the same kind of eternal death. Instead, when the light of the gospel shines in our heart, what we're called to do, like Paul, like Peter, like these others that we saw this morning, is to recognize the light is actually exposing what is really there. My real, desperate need for Jesus. That running from that kind of light doesn't make me something other than what I am. Only He can change me. And so instead of leaving the light, we stay there and say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That this is who I am, but I know that this is not who you made me to be. That you've actually called me to turn from my sin and to trust in Jesus. And that one of the clear signs this morning, if you're here and you say, I know all of this. I've been following Jesus for a long time. Look, one of the clearest signs that you really are following Jesus, that you understand Him to be who He is, that you are trusting Him in the way He's called you to trust Him, is that there has been some kind of genuine transformation in your life. A progress toward Christ-likeness. We're told in the Scriptures that is the goal of salvation after all. It's conformity to the image of Jesus. That more and more, the longer we stay in the light, though we become more and more aware of our own sinfulness, we also become more and more aware of our need for Jesus. And so we continue to trust Him even more. We go to Him in faith, we listen to what He says, and we follow through with that in obedience. That's the call for every one of us here this morning. Well, whether you would say before you came in here this morning you don't consider yourself to be a Christian, or whether you're here today and you would consider yourself to have been a Christian for a long time. The response for us, all of us this morning, is the exact same. Do not run from the light. recognize your real need for Jesus and look to him, trust him, and listen to what he says.